My son was getting married. Just saying those words should have filled me with pride, but instead, it felt hollow, like repeating a line from someone else's life. I'd imagined that moment 1,000 times. The phone call, the excitement, the father-son talk about tuxedos, speeches, maybe a quiet drink the night before the ceremony. But the call never came, at least not the one I expected. The rest of the family was buzzing. My ex-wife couldn't stop talking about the preparations. My sister sent me photos of decorations she'd seen online, suggesting what they might choose. Every conversation seemed to orbit around his wedding. And me? I just nodded, smiled, and tried to convince myself that maybe the invitation was coming later. Maybe they were still finalizing the guest list. Maybe there was some mix-up with the mail. Weeks passed. I checked my mailbox every morning like a fool, flipping through bills, advertisements, nothing. Each day, a little more silence settled in. My coworkers asked if I was excited. I told them, of course. What else was I supposed to say? That I hadn't even been invited to my only son's wedding? I still remember the day I bought him his first bike. He was 7, afraid to fall, afraid to fail. I ran beside him, holding the seat until he found his balance. When he finally pedaled away on his own, he turned back and shouted, "Look, Dad, I'm doing it." That was one of those moments you think will last forever. That bond between father and son, built on trust, pride, and love. You never imagine the day he'll tell you you're not welcome at the biggest day of his life. The silence became unbearable. I called once, maybe twice, just to check in. He didn't answer. I left short messages. Nothing emotional, nothing desperate, just the kind of small talk that a man uses to hide his disappointment. "Hey, son, just wanted to see how you're doing. Hope the planning's going well. Call me when you get a chance." He never did. A week before the wedding, I ran into my ex-wife at the grocery store. She looked surprised to see me, almost guilty. "Are you going to the ceremony?" I asked, pretending to be casual, though my voice betrayed me. She shifted her purse and avoided my eyes. "You should talk to him about that," she said quickly. Then she walked away. That was my answer, even if she hadn't said the words. I went home that evening and sat in my old leather chair, the same one I used to rock him to sleep in when he was a baby. The house was quiet, too quiet. I looked at the framed photos on the shelf, his graduation, his first car, the family vacations before the divorce. Each picture was a frozen piece of time, a reminder of a man who once mattered. It's funny how parenthood works. You spend decades giving, building, sacrificing, and you never expect repayment. You don't do it for gratitude, but you assume, somewhere deep inside, that when the most important moments come, you'll at least be there. That night, I opened a bottle of whiskey I'd been saving for the wedding toast. It was a 25-year-old single malt, smooth and warm. I poured a glass and raised it in silence, a toast to the son who'd forgotten his father. The next morning, I received a group message from the family chat, photos of the wedding venue, smiling faces, flowers, golden lights. My sister wrote, "It's going to be magical." I stared at the screen for a long time, the words blurring slightly. Not from sadness anymore, but from something colder. Acceptance, maybe. I started thinking about all the moments that led us here. The years after the divorce, when I worked double shifts to make sure he could go to college. The nights I sat alone in the stands, watching him play baseball, cheering even when he pretended not to notice me. The quiet Christmases when I bought him gifts he never opened. Was it all meaningless? Or had I simply been replaced? Part of me wondered what his mother had told him all those years. Maybe I was the villain in her version of the story, the distant father, the strict one, the man too focused on work. It's easy to rewrite history when the other person isn't around to defend himself. Still, I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was tired, disappointed. The kind of disappointment that doesn't shout. It just sinks into your bones and stays there. Then, one evening, my phone rang. The name on the screen made my heart skip. Michael, my son. For a brief second, hope returned. Irrational, desperate hope. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe he was calling to say the invitation got lost in the mail. Maybe, finally, I'd hear the words I'd been waiting for. "Dad, I want you there." I answered quickly. "Hey, son." There was a pause on the other end, the kind that tells you everything before a word is spoken. "Dad," he said flatly, "I just wanted to let you know, please don't come to the wedding." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard right. "Don't come." "Yeah," he said, exhaling. "It's just, Things are complicated. Mom thinks it would be better if you weren't there. To keep the peace. I swallowed hard. To keep the peace. Yeah, it's not personal. It's just you know how she is. Right? I said slowly. And what about you, Michael? What do you think? Another pause. Then his answer, soft, but sharp enough to cut through everything we ever shared. I think it's better if you don't come. You'd just make things awkward. Awkward. The word echoed in my head like a gunshot. For a long time, neither of us spoke. I could hear noise in the background, laughter, voices, maybe his fiancée talking. He was somewhere alive, happy, surrounded. And I was sitting in an empty house, holding a phone that suddenly felt heavier than it should. Finally, I said, "All right, son, I understand." And I did. Not because I agreed, but because there was nothing left to say. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, staring at my reflection in the dark screen. Somewhere deep inside, a part of me cracked, quietly, almost imperceptibly. Not anger yet, just a quiet realization that something sacred had died between us. The invitation never came. But what did arrive, that phone call, was far more powerful. It was the sound of a bridge burning, slow and deliberate. And as I sat in the silence that followed, I promised myself one thing. If he ever came to learn what it meant to erase someone who built your world, that lesson would not be gentle. When those words left his mouth, it felt like someone had driven a nail straight into my chest. Dad, don't come to the wedding. You're not needed there. You'll just make things awkward. Awkward? That word echoed in my head like a curse. Awkward. After I'd been there through every scraped knee, every school project, every heartbreak. After I worked double shifts just to make sure he could go to college without drowning in debt. And now, I was an inconvenience. I didn't say anything right away. My throat was tight, and my pride was bleeding. I could hear the hesitation in his voice, but also a hint of something colder, embarrassment. It wasn't just that he didn't want me there. He was ashamed of me. I've never been a man of fancy suits or polite small talk. I'm a man who built his life with his hands, oil-stained palms, cracked nails, and tired eyes. Maybe I didn't fit the image he wanted to present at his picture-perfect wedding, the one with crystal glasses, designer flowers, and people who talk in whispers about money and influence. I swallowed my anger, but inside, something shifted. There's a particular kind of silence that only a father knows, the one that comes after realizing his son has outgrown not just his home, but his heart. "All right, son," I finally said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "I understand." He exhaled, relieved, as if I'd done him a favor. "Thanks, Dad. It's just complicated. You know how people can be." Oh, I knew. I knew exactly what kind of people he was talking about. The ones who measured a man by the price of his suit and the shine of his car. And I knew exactly when my son had started to become one of them. When the call ended, I sat there staring at the wall for a long time. My old dog came over, laid his head on my knee, sensing something was wrong. I scratched behind his ear and whispered, "Guess it's just you and me now." "Buddy," I thought about the wedding, how they'd all smile for the cameras, clink their glasses, and talk about family. They'd probably toast to love and loyalty while erasing me from the story entirely. But what cut deepest wasn't being excluded. It was how easily he said it. No hesitation, no guilt, just final, like closing a door that would never open again. That night, I poured myself a drink, not out of sadness, but reflection. I replayed every sacrifice I'd made for him. The nights I came home covered in grease, too tired to eat, but still checked his homework. The mornings I skipped breakfast so he could have lunch money. The day I sold my vintage motorcycle, the only thing I'd ever bought for myself, to help him pay for his engagement ring. And now, the same son who once clung to my arm when he was scared of thunder told me I didn't belong. But here's the thing about fathers. We don't stop loving our children when they hurt us. We just change how we love them. I told myself I wouldn't ruin his big day. I wouldn't make a scene. But a small part of me whispered, he'll regret this. One day he'll understand. 2 days later, that one day came sooner than I expected. A message popped up on my phone. It was from him. For a brief moment, my heart lifted. Maybe he changed his mind. Maybe he realized what he'd said. I opened it. It wasn't an apology. It was an invoice. A neatly formatted, itemized bill for $5.5 million. I blinked, thinking it had to be a mistake. But no, it was real. At the bottom, he wrote, "Dad, could you handle this for me? It's for the venue and final expenses. You know I'll pay you back." I laughed. Out loud. Not the kind of laugh that comes from humor, but disbelief. The same son who said I didn't belong at his wedding now wanted me to pay for it. And in that moment, the hurt melted away, replaced by something sharper, colder, and strangely satisfying. He had no idea what kind of man he'd just challenged. That was the moment I decided I wouldn't just let this go. He wanted me out of his wedding? Fine. But he was about to learn that erasing me came with a price. I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window at the night sky. "You don't belong there," he said. Maybe he was right. Maybe I didn't belong at that wedding. But when the day came, every single person there would remember me. And not for what I said, but for what I did. For 2 whole days, I didn't speak to a single soul. No calls, no texts, no fake apologies. The world around me seemed to move slower, as if even time itself wanted to stay quiet. My phone sat on the kitchen table, a black, lifeless rectangle. No notifications, no missed calls, just silence. It's strange how quiet can be louder than words. That kind of silence doesn't comfort you, it haunts you. It echoes in your chest, bouncing between memories you wish you could forget and moments you wish you could relive. At first, I kept checking the phone, telling myself, he'll call. He'll realize what he said. But deep down, I already knew the truth. I wasn't part of their new life anymore. They'd all made their decision. My son, his bride-to-be, even my ex-wife. They'd drawn a perfect picture of their future and decided I didn't fit the frame. I was the scratch on their glossy surface, the oil stain on their white carpet. So, they erased me. That realization didn't break me, it freed me. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the sunrise paint the sky with gold and fire. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to give him the best I could. Not perfect, just honest. Everything I earned came from my own 2 hands. There was no inheritance, no trust fund, no silver spoon. Just sweat, calluses, and time. And maybe that's why he didn't want me there, because I reminded him of where he came from. The thought made me smile, but not out of sadness, out of understanding. People don't always reject you because they hate you. Sometimes, they reject you because you remind them of what they're trying to forget. Still, that $5.5 million bill, that was something else. It was the clearest message a man could send. You're not welcome here, but your money is. I couldn't decide which part was worse, being unwanted or being treated like a walking wallet. For 2 days, I said nothing. Not to him, not to anyone. But I was thinking, planning, quietly sharpening something inside me that had been dull for too long. Because silence, when it belongs to the right kind of man, isn't weakness. It's the sound of a storm gathering strength. I started going through old documents, old contacts, people I hadn't spoken to in years. You'd be surprised how many doors you can open when you've spent a lifetime fixing things for others. Favors have a long memory, longer than gratitude, even. I didn't want revenge. Not yet. What I wanted was clarity. I wanted to understand who my son had become and why. So, I started digging. Quietly, discreetly. Turns out, the wedding wasn't as perfect as they made it seem. The venue? Booked under his fiancé's father's company. A shell corporation buried under a pile of unpaid loans. The decorations, the catering, even the music, all charged on credit. They were putting on a show they couldn't afford. And when the fantasy started cracking, my son thought of the one man who could fix things, me. That realization burned. I had raised him to be strong, independent, honorable. But somewhere along the way, he'd learned to fake instead of build, to buy instead of earn. And for that, I blamed myself. Because every time I saved him from a mistake, I robbed him of a lesson. Every time I said, "Don't worry, I'll handle it," I taught him that consequences were optional, that dad would always come through. Now he was a grown man, and the boy who never learned to face his own failures was about to walk down the aisle pretending his life was perfect. That's when something clicked inside me. This wasn't just about me being excluded anymore. This was about showing him what real life looks like when you try to erase your roots. On the second night, I poured myself another drink. The kind of drink that doesn't warm you, it steadies you. I stared at the wedding invitation I'd printed off their social media page, the one they never sent me. White letters, golden border, perfect calligraphy. It was beautiful. Cold. I put it on the table, next to his text message. 2 pieces of paper, one disinviting me, the other demanding millions. I laughed quietly. You've got your priorities straight, son, I muttered. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere in the distance. The air felt heavy, charged, like the world was holding its breath. I took out a notepad and started writing. Not a letter, not a plan, a statement. A list of every favor I'd ever done for him. Every loan I'd paid off. Every sacrifice I'd made. Not for revenge, but for remembrance. When you spend your life giving, people forget the cost. I wanted him to remember. The next morning, I went about my day like nothing had happened. Fed the dog, fixed a loose board on the porch, made breakfast. But everything I did felt different. There was a stillness inside me, calm, deliberate, focused. They thought I was out of the picture. They thought they'd silenced me. But silence isn't absence. It's potential. By the third morning, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I wasn't going to beg for an invitation. I wasn't going to fight for a place at that table. I was going to show up, not as a guest, but as a lesson, not to destroy his life, but to make him finally see it. Because sometimes, the only way to wake someone up is to shake the very ground they're standing on. And so I waited. Patient, calm, quiet. The silence before the storm. It came out of nowhere, like a slap you don't see coming. I was drinking my morning coffee, scrolling through the usual junk mail, ads, promotions, reminders for things I didn't care about. And then I saw it. The sender's name made my stomach twist for a moment. Ethan, my son. For a brief second, I thought maybe, just maybe, it was an apology. A text to patch things up. Some hint of regret. But no. When I opened the email, I didn't find an apology. I found an invoice. Bold letters at the top. Outstanding balance. $5,500,000. And beneath that, a detailed breakdown. Wedding venue. $2,100,000. Catering and decor. $1,800,000. Entertainment and photography. $600,000. Honeymoon, Maldives luxury package. $1 million. At the bottom, the line that nearly made me choke on my coffee. Charge to. My full name, primary account holder. I stared at that screen for a long time. Not out of confusion, out of disbelief. My hands were steady, but my chest burned. He had actually done it. My son, my flesh and blood, had used my name, my credit, my history, to fund a wedding I wasn't even allowed to attend. At first, I thought it had to be some sort of mistake. Maybe his fiance's father accidentally used the wrong name, or maybe it was a glitch in the booking system. But then I scrolled down. At the bottom was a message from Ethan himself. No greeting. No dad. Just, hey, the bills are all coming through. Could you just handle this for now? I'll sort you out after the wedding. Promise. That was it. No gratitude. No shame. Not even punctuation that suggested hesitation. He actually expected me to pay. And that's when I laughed. Quietly. Coldly. Not the laugh of a madman. The laugh of a man who's finally seen the truth. See, when you reach a certain age, you stop being surprised by betrayal. But there's something uniquely painful about realizing that the boy you raised to be a man grew into something else. I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking under my weight, and let the silence settle again. The morning sun cut through the blinds, stripes of light across the table. The same table where Ethan used to sit and do his homework, asking me how to spell responsibility. Funny, I thought. He still doesn't know. I opened another tab and checked my accounts. Sure enough, there were authorizations pending, transactions under my name, all tied to the same event company. My credit cards had been used. My reputation, my trust, my name, stolen by my own son. And the worst part? He didn't even think it was wrong. To him, I was still the guy who fixed things. The man who always found a way. The safety net he could fall onto without consequence. He didn't fear crossing the line, because I'd never shown him where it was. That realization hit harder than the bill. I wasn't just angry, I was ashamed. Ashamed of myself for letting it happen. For raising a son who could look me in the eye, say, "You're not needed," and then have the nerve to hand me the bill for it. I walked to the window and looked out at the yard, the same one I'd built for him to play in. The swing set was still there, faded and rusted, swaying slightly in the wind. It reminded me of simpler times, when a scraped knee was the worst thing he could do to himself. Now, he'd scraped something deeper, something that doesn't heal as easily. I turned back to the computer and reread the email. Each line felt like a wound. But by the third read, the sting was gone, replaced by something else. Clarity. You see, There's a point when a man's patience stops being kindness and starts being weakness. I had reached that point. For decades, I'd carried everyone else's burdens. My ex-wife's spending, my son's debts, the family's expectations. I'd been the invisible scaffolding holding up a tower that no one ever thanked me for building. But not anymore. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to beg or plead. That's what he expected, a confrontation, a fight, maybe a lecture about respect. No, I was going to do something he wouldn't expect. I was going to let him walk straight into the storm he'd created. Because here's the truth about responsibility. When you take someone's help for granted long enough, one day they'll stop helping, and the world will crash down on you faster than you can blink. I clicked reply, and I wrote, Ethan, I received your message. I'll handle it. That's all. No emotion. No signature. No love, Dad. Then I forwarded the email, not to him, but to a friend of mine, a man who owed me a favor, a quiet professional who worked with finances, auditing, and the kind of legal gray areas that most people pretend don't exist. I attached everything, the transactions, the invoice, his message, and then I made one call. Hey, Carl, I said, I need you to make sure this payment goes exactly where it should, and I want you to keep me updated. He paused. You sure you want to do this? Completely, I replied. I hung up and sat back, letting the calm settle in again, because I already knew what was going to happen. The moment that money moved, the moment the wedding bills hit the wrong accounts, the truth would start unraveling. Contracts would be questioned, ownership would be disputed, and everything that looked perfect on the surface would begin to rot underneath. My son wanted to play games with my name. He was about to learn how dangerous it can be to underestimate the man who gave it to him. I looked at the screen one last time, at the email that had started it all. Then I deleted it. And as the message disappeared into the digital void, I whispered to myself, All right, son, you've made your move. I stood up, poured myself another coffee, and smiled. Now it's my turn. I didn't roar. I didn't threaten. I sat very still and thought. That was my advantage, the luxury of time and experience. Anger is loud and obvious. Cleverness is quiet and precise. When a man has spent 40 years building things with his hands, he learns the difference between breaking and unmaking. Revenge isn't fireworks. It's taking the screws out of the things someone depends on and watching them rattle apart. For years, I'd been the safety net under my son's acrobatics. Business lines I co-signed, apartments rented in my name, the occasional loan paid off with a grunt and a check. He called me when a deal went sour, when a roof needed fixing, when a late fee threatened to snowball. I fixed it. I smoothed things. I kept the engine running while he drove the car. That arrangement had a price. The price was entitlement. The day he told me I didn't belong at his wedding, he revealed how he really thought of me. Invisible until needed, invisible when inconvenient. He had crossed the line. The invoice was the proof. So I stopped being reaction and became a quiet machine. The first thing I did was inventory. Not of goods or money, but of leverage. Who owed me favors? Which contracts named me as guarantor? Which vendors used my accounts? I laid it all out on a notepad. Names, numbers, account IDs, the dates of agreements. It was methodical, almost clinical. It felt good. I started with the small, humane things. I called the credit card company and asked to place a temporary hold on new charges pending verification. I wasn't looking to ruin his credit. I simply wanted a buffer. If the charges couldn't clear because the authorization came from a card I'd canceled that morning, it would force them to reckon with reality. I didn't need the drama of a courthouse. I needed the subtle ache of inconvenience that snowballs into panic. Next, I reached out to people. Not with threats, but with reminders. Remember that time I covered the damages after your contractor walked off the job? I'd say, I could use a favor. Favors have a way of accumulating interest. I'd fixed more than a few lives in my time. Those men and women remembered. A call here, a text there, and the chain began to hum. There was Carl, the accountant, the man who knows how to follow money like a bloodhound. He owed me for a long-ago loan of cash and silence. He agreed to review the invoices and the authorization trail. Nothing illegal, just diligence. If payments were misapplied, if the venue had accepted a name without proper authorization, Carl would find it. Contracts are brittle once someone starts tugging at the corners. There was Mary Ann, owner of the floral company. She remembered the time I covered her payroll when a large client stiffed her. If you ask nicely, she said, I can hold the order. Flowers are perishable. Without payment, they don't show up. She didn't need my explanation. She understood the language of consequences. Then there was the venue manager, a man who loved the prestige of high-profile weddings and hated the headache of unpaid balances. I called him, not to shout, but to ask a question. Do you have written authorization for the charges under my name? His pause told me everything. No, he admitted. We have a digital form, but it's tied to an email address that isn't yours. That was the crack. Paperwork is the skeleton of civility. When the bones shift, the whole body trembles. I avoided theatrics. No scenes, no confrontations. I didn't post anything to social media or call my son to gloat. He didn't deserve my voice. Patience was sharper. I watched, I nudged, and I waited for the structure he'd built on borrowed reputation to show its true weight. There's an art to withdrawing support. You don't collapse everything at once. You tighten the screws that keep the facade upright. I froze authorizations quietly, one by one. I notified the limo company that the contract required re-verification. The photographer received a polite email asking for confirmation of the client's billing information. The caterer got a call. Their payment had been delayed pending bank verification. Each one alone would not stop a wedding. Together, they are a chorus that makes the whole song sound off-key. In the evenings, when the house grew quiet and the dog settled his head on my knee, I'd go over the timeline again. I pictured the morning of the wedding, the hall buzzing with florists, the caterer's vans lining the curb, guests arriving in rented tuxes and sequin dresses. I imagined the slow realization that the services were in limbo, a procession of polite panic. That image wasn't born of cruelty. It was born of wanting a lesson to be learned, the kind that lodges in the chest and won't be mistaken for anything else. I also made sure relief was within reach, not for him at first, but for the collateral damage. The guests, the elderly relatives, the vendors who needed cash to pay their staff. I set up contingencies so that the fallout wouldn't ruin other people. Revenge, I reminded myself, was not punishment without conscience. It was correction. It was a way to return responsibility to the one who'd shirked it. As I pulled strings, a strange calm settled over me. There's a confidence that comes from understanding systems and knowing which cog to nudge. It was a far cry from the raw, impotent rage I'd felt when he hung up the phone. The calm was almost pleasurable, not because I reveled in his discomfort, but because for the first time in a long time I was acting for myself rather than for everyone else. Word of the freezes moved slowly through the network of suppliers. A florist called to apologize and ask if we could settle things quietly. The venue manager, on the phone, used the words clerical error and misapplied authorization. His voice trembled when I suggested a solution that would protect his reputation, an immediate audit. I hinted at the legal exposure if he accepted payment without proper proof. He listened. Meanwhile, my son sent messages, curt, confused, then panicked. I read them in the kitchen, over the sink, hands wet from cleaning a cast-off tool. I didn't reply. The silence I'd learned to love now served its purpose. He had to knock on his own door and find it locked. He had to experience the consequence of treating people like lines on a ledger. When he finally called me, his voice was a mix of anger and pleading. He tried to demand and minimize at the same time. Dad, just authorize it. I'll pay you back right after the ceremony. He sounded small on the other end of the line, a boy who'd tried to borrow the world and had finally been told no. You said don't come, he said, as if that absolved him of decency. I answered calmly. I said I understand. I said. I also said something else, that respect is earned. I didn't elaborate. There was no need. The game had shifted. He was playing on my field now. The calm before revenge isn't the hush before chaos. It's the silence a craftsman takes before making the final cut, precise, measured, inevitable. I wasn't the kind of man who wanted to break people for sport. I wanted him to stop pretending he could erase the people who lifted him. On the night before the wedding, I slept like a man who knows his hands are steady. I wasn't triumphant. I was resolute. What I had set in motion would teach him something. The lesson might sting. It might bruise. But sometimes the only cure for entitlement is the shock of accountability. Morning would bring what it would. I'd made my moves. Now the world would show its face. I poured a cup of coffee, sat at the table, and looked at the list of names I'd written down. Not a shopping list, but a ledger of responsibilities. I underlined a few. I folded the page and put it in my wallet. Revenge, I reminded myself, was a form of truth-telling. It didn't have to shout. It only had to be honest. The morning of the wedding arrived like any other, calm, bright, and deceptively peaceful. But under that calm was a quiet storm I had been preparing for days. I woke early, earlier than usual. Made my coffee the same way I always did, black, no sugar. I stood by the window of my office, watching the city move, and thought about how strange it was that I had to teach my own son a lesson in respect. I didn't feel anger anymore. That had burned away days ago. What I felt now was control, a cold, deliberate control that only comes when you stop reacting and start orchestrating. At exactly 8 a.m., I opened my laptop. The list of vendors was right there on my screen. The venue, the catering company, the florist, the limousine service, and the honeymoon resort. All of it was connected to my business accounts, my authorization. Every signature, every transaction, every approved buy had my name on it. They'd built their dream wedding on my foundation, forgetting who actually laid the bricks. I started with the venue. It was a luxurious estate on the outskirts of the city, marble halls, chandeliers the size of cars, a place they'd chosen to impress, not to celebrate. I dialed the number, calm as a surgeon. "Good morning, this is Michael Stern," I said, using my formal tone, the one that used to make investors listen. "I'm calling to revoke payment authorization for the event scheduled under my account this afternoon." The woman on the other end hesitated. "Sir, that's the Williamson wedding, correct?" "That's correct." There was a pause. I could almost hear her brain trying to process the situation. "But sir, everything is already set up. The event is today." "I understand. Cancel it. Immediately. I'll be sending an email to confirm, and my attorney will follow up." Her tone shifted instantly. "Understood, Mr. Stern." Click. One down. Next was the florist. A smaller vendor, family-owned, run by a sweet old couple who'd probably never imagined being part of a situation like this. I almost felt bad for them. Almost. "Cancel the delivery for the Williamson wedding," I told them. "The card used for payment has been closed." "But, sir." "No exceptions," I said quietly. "This is a legal matter." "Thank you." Two down. By 9:15, I had called every vendor on the list. The limo company, the caterers, the photographer, the five-star hotel where the newlyweds were supposed to spend their honeymoon. All canceled. Every invoice marked void. Every payment reversed. It was like pulling the strings of a puppet show. One tug here, one cut there, and the whole illusion started to collapse. By 10:30, my phone buzzed. It was the venue manager, his voice tense. "Mr. Stern, we've got a situation. The groom and bride just arrived, and we can't proceed without payment. They're not taking it well." "I can imagine," I said dryly. "But that's not my problem anymore." He hesitated. "Do you want me to explain it to them?" "No," I said. "Let him call me himself." And right on cue, less than 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. My son. The name flashing on the screen used to make me proud. Now, it just made me curious. I wanted to hear what kind of man he had become when the money disappeared. I picked up. "Hello, son." His voice was trembling, but he tried to sound composed. "Dad, what the hell is going on? The venue says the payment didn't go through. The florist, the catering, they're all calling me." "I know," I said simply. "What do you mean, you know?" "I mean, I canceled them." There was silence. Then a sharp inhale. "You canceled them?" "Dad, this is my wedding day." "Your wedding?" I repeated slowly. "A wedding I wasn't invited to. A wedding I was told I didn't belong at. Yet, strangely, it was being funded entirely by me." "That's not the point," he shouted. "You can't just do that. Everything's already." "Already what?" I interrupted. "Already paid for with my name, my money, my reputation? You thought you could erase me from your life, but keep my wallet in your pocket. That's not how this works." He was silent again, but I could hear his breathing, sharp, uneven. The sound of a man realizing for the first time that the ground he stood on wasn't his. "Dad, please," he said finally. "Everyone's here. Mom's furious. People are watching. You're humiliating me." I closed my eyes and leaned back in my chair. "You humiliated yourself, son, when you told your father he wasn't needed. When you decided I was an obstacle instead of a man who loved you." He tried again, desperate now. "I didn't mean it like that. I was just..." "Just what?" I cut him off. "Trying to impress your new family? Show them you're independent? You're not independent, son. You're just entitled. There's a difference." For a moment, I heard nothing. Then, quietly, Please, Dad, can you fix this? Just this once. That line. Just this once. The same phrase he used every time I bailed him out of a failed business, or covered a rent payment, or wrote a check to help him get back on his feet. I almost smiled. He hadn't changed at all. No, I said finally. Not this time. And then I hung up. It was the cleanest sound in the world, that click. The sound of a man taking back his power. By noon, chaos had bloomed like wildfire. My ex-wife called next, furious, her words tumbling over each other. How could you do this, Michael? He's your son. You ruined his wedding. No, I said calmly. I just stopped paying for it. You're unbelievable. I know, I said, and ended the call. I leaned back in my chair and took another sip of coffee. Outside, the day was still beautiful. Clear skies, not a hint of storm. And yet, somewhere across town, my son was learning the kind of lesson that no school, no lecture, and no amount of money could ever teach. When you cut off the hand that feeds you, don't be surprised when it stops feeding. For the first time in years, I didn't feel used. I didn't feel small. I felt free. And as the chaos unfolded, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't revenge. It was justice. The calm, surgical kind that only a father who's finally had enough could deliver. By the time the first guests began arriving, the chaos was already in full bloom. The estate that was supposed to host the wedding of the year had turned into a war zone of confusion and panic. The grand marble foyer, once filled with the scent of fresh roses, now reeked of burnt circuits and spilled champagne. The string quartet had packed up and left. The catering staff were standing around, confused, waiting for a payment that never came. The lights flickered, then died completely, leaving the expensive chandeliers as nothing more than dead crystal ornaments above a dark, empty hall. The bride, in her untouched wedding gown, sat on the steps leading to the ballroom, tears streaming down her face. Her makeup ran like ink on a wet page. Her friends surrounded her, whispering apologies, but none of them knew what to say. Every comfort sounded hollow. Every reassurance turned into a lie before it even left their lips. Somewhere in that growing storm of embarrassment and shock, my ex-wife was screaming at someone. The wedding planner, I think. Her voice cut through the noise like glass against metal. Fix this. I don't care what it costs. Do you know who we are? But no one cared anymore. The venue manager had already locked his office door and called legal. The staff knew they weren't getting paid. The DJ was gone. The florist had driven off hours ago with a truck full of unused bouquets. And my son, my only son, stood there in the middle of it all, pale as a ghost, staring at his phone like it could somehow reverse everything. He had called me 3 more times since that morning. I didn't answer. He sent messages, voice notes, some angry, some pleading. I read them all, but I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. He had built a life on the illusion that my generosity was endless, that my patience was infinite, that I'd always step in to save him before the world taught him what consequence feels like. But not today. Today, the world was teaching him a lesson I had postponed for far too long. Guests began whispering. Some of them had traveled from out of state, colleagues, distant relatives, business partners. They'd all arrived expecting champagne and fireworks, and instead were greeted by darkness and chaos. A few of them started leaving quietly, their faces full of confusion and pity. Others stayed, watching the disaster unfold, unwilling to miss the spectacle. One man, a friend of mine from the old business circle, later told me it felt like watching a castle crumble in real time. You could see the moment he realized, he said. It wasn't anger. It was disbelief. Like a kid who touched fire for the first time. I can imagine it clearly. The bride's father was yelling now too, red-faced and furious. What kind of man lets this happen, he barked. This is disgraceful. My son tried to explain. It's not my fault. The payments, the accounts, something went wrong. Something went wrong? The man shouted. You promised us a royal wedding. You said it was all taken care of. My son had no answer. Because deep down, he knew everything had been taken care of. By me. Until I decided it shouldn't be. And then, just as the tension reached its peak, the power went out completely. The entire estate plunged into darkness. Gasps echoed across the hall. Someone dropped a glass. Somewhere, a generator sputtered but never caught. The most important day of my son's life became a silent, candlelit disaster. Meanwhile, I sat in my office, miles away, watching the evening sun dip behind the skyline. I poured myself a drink, not out of celebration, but reflection. For years, I had been the quiet engine behind his world. I paid for his first apartment, his car, his education, his business loans, even his engagement ring. I did it because that's what fathers do. They give, they build, they hope. But somewhere along the line, giving turned into being used. He stopped calling to ask how I was doing, only what I could help him with. Every thanks, Dad, became just another placeholder for the next request. And when I finally stopped giving, he stopped pretending to care. So when he told me not to come to his wedding, something inside me snapped, not out of anger, but realization. He didn't just exclude me from a ceremony. He excluded me from his life. And that's when I understood. Sometimes love means stepping back and letting the fall happen. By the time the guests had left and the sun had set, the once beautiful estate looked like the aftermath of a storm. Half-eaten cake, empty champagne flutes, torn flowers, and silence. My son sat outside, his suit wrinkled, his face buried in his hands. The bride had locked herself in a dressing room, her white gown stained with tears and frustration. My ex-wife was still trying to salvage what little dignity she could, but it was useless. No photos, no music, no vows, no wedding, just lessons. Later that night, around 10 p.m., I finally picked up when he called again. His voice was hoarse, tired, and stripped of its usual arrogance. "Dad," he said quietly, "it's over. The wedding's canceled." She left. I didn't speak. I wanted him to continue. "I don't know what to do," he said. "Everything fell apart. Everyone hates me. I don't understand why you did this." I took a deep breath. "You don't understand, because you've never had to build anything on your own," I said. "You think love is a resource you can demand, not something you earn. I gave you everything, and you learned nothing." "That's not fair," he whispered. "No," I said. "What wasn't fair was being told I wasn't needed, while you spent my money to celebrate without me." Silence again. Then, for the first time in years, I heard him cry. Not the angry kind, the real kind, the kind that comes when the walls finally collapse. "Dad, I'm sorry." Those words, small, shaky, but genuine, were worth more than the entire $5.5 million he expected me to pay. "I know you are," I said softly. "Now start fixing it. Yourself." I hung up, but this time, it wasn't out of spite. It was closure. That night, I slept better than I had in years. The world felt balanced again, not because I had taken revenge, but because I had reclaimed my self-respect. The next morning, the headlines in our social circles began spreading: lavish wedding collapses amid financial confusion. Some people call me ruthless. Others call me smart. I didn't care either way, because for the first time, my son learned what I had always hoped he would, that no empire survives when it forgets who built it. And the wedding that never happened, that was the day he finally grew up. I didn't go to the wedding that day. I didn't need to. Sometimes, the most powerful presence in a man's life is his absence. While the chaos unfolded miles away, I sat on my porch with a cup of black coffee, watching the sun rise over the trees. The world was quiet, birds singing, wind brushing the leaves, and for the first time in years, my mind was still. I thought about everything that had led to this day, the arguments, the disappointments, the endless second chances. It was strange how peace could come from something so painful. By mid-afternoon, my phone buzzed. I didn't look at it. I knew who it was. Probably him, or someone speaking on his behalf, trying to smooth things over, trying to patch up what couldn't be patched. I let it ring. When the sun finally set, I got another call. This time, I answered. His voice was hoarse, small, stripped of every trace of the pride that used to fill it. "Dad," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. I didn't say anything at first. Silence has its own weight, heavier than words, deeper than anger. It makes the other person listen, really listen." He continued, his voice trembling. "I messed up. I thought I was proving something, that I could stand on my own, that I didn't need your help. But I went too far. I disrespected you. I didn't realize how much you've done for me until it was gone." I could hear him breathing hard, like he was trying to keep himself from crying. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Finally," I said, "you didn't just disrespect me, son. You forgot what it means to be a man. Respect isn't given because of blood or last names. It's earned through actions, through gratitude, through humility." He stayed silent. I imagined him sitting somewhere dark, probably still in his suit, staring at the wreckage of what should have been the best day of his life. After a long pause, he said, "I don't deserve your forgiveness." I leaned back, looking at the stars above me. "Maybe not yet," I said, "but you can earn it. Start by owning what you've done. Stop expecting life to hand you comfort just because I did." He whispered, "I understand." And I believed him, not because of his words, but because for the first time, there was no argument, no defensiveness, no excuses. Just a young man finally facing the mirror without flinching. When we hung up, I sat there for a long while, thinking about what just happened. I didn't smile out of revenge. I smiled because I knew that maybe, finally, my son had become the man I had always hoped he'd be. The next morning, the headlines were still circling through our social circles. The wedding that collapsed, the million-dollar disaster, the groom who lost everything. Some people called me cruel. Others said I was teaching a lesson. The truth? It wasn't about punishment. It was about principle. Money can be replaced. Pride can be rebuilt. But respect, once lost, takes a lifetime to earn back. Days passed before I heard from him again. Then one afternoon, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, he was standing there. Not in a suit. Not in his polished shoes. Just jeans, a plain shirt, and eyes that had seen enough humiliation to finally understand humility. He didn't speak right away. Neither did I. "Finally," he said, "I came to return something." He handed me an envelope, my old checkbook, the one he'd been using for his business and expenses. "I don't want it anymore," he said. "I'm going to work. For real this time." I nodded slowly, saying nothing. He looked around the porch, the same one he used to play on as a kid. I could see memories flickering behind his eyes. Birthdays, lessons, summers we spent fixing up old cars. There was a part of him that still remembered who he used to be before entitlement took over. He asked quietly, "Do you hate me, Dad?" I shook my head. "No, I never could. But I was disappointed. There's a difference." He sat down beside me. I was trying to impress everyone. I thought success meant looking powerful. The big wedding, the show, the image. I thought if I could build something that looked perfect, I'd finally prove I was your equal. I looked at him and said, "You don't become a man by impressing people, son. You become one by standing when nobody's clapping." He stared down, nodding slowly. I could tell he was finally listening. Then, after a moment, he said, "I want to start over. No more shortcuts. No more pretending." "Good," I said. "Then start with the hardest thing first, forgiveness. Not mine, but yours. Forgive yourself for being blind. Then learn, work, earn, build. The world doesn't owe you anything, but it will give you everything if you're willing to fight for it." We sat there for a while, two men, no longer father and son in the old sense, but equals in understanding. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. Weeks later, I heard through a friend that he'd taken a small job at a construction firm. Nothing fancy. Hard labor, long hours, dirty hands. But honest work. Real work. The kind of work that teaches a man who he is. He didn't ask me for help. He didn't need to. And I didn't offer, because I knew this was his path, the one he needed to walk alone. A few months passed, and one evening, he called again. His voice was lighter this time. "Dad," he said, "I paid off my first debt today. It's small, but it's mine. Every cent came from my work." I smiled, truly smiled. "That's how it starts," I said. "Not with millions, but with moments like that." There was a pause. Then he added, "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I get it now. Everything you did, I get it." And that was enough. More than enough. Sometimes, the greatest lesson a father can teach isn't through words, but through distance. Through letting your child face the cold truth of consequence. Because comfort spoils, but struggle shapes. Years from now, when I'm gone, I hope he remembers not the money, not the arguments, not even the wedding that never happened, but that one moment when he learned what respect truly meant. It wasn't about fear. It wasn't about control. It was about dignity. About being a man who stands tall not because someone holds him up, but because he built his own spine. That's when I smiled again, quietly, almost to myself. Not because I had won, but because he finally had. And that, I realized, was the lesson he'd never forget.